Bobby Fischer was many things, and a great chess player was one of those things, and today in the video we're going to look at the top 5 openings that enabled him to have such a successful chess career. These are the openings that he kept on coming back to, and I would recommend these to anyone who wants to imitate his style. So as we jump in, I just want to quickly remind you that this is part of a larger series, so if you have a different favorite player, I've already made these sort of videos for Magnus, for Hikaru, for Anand, for Danya as well. Let me know down below the future players that you want to see their opening repertoire, but let's jump straight in. With the white side, Fischer played e4 pretty much exclusively, and in response to e5, he played the Ruy Lopez like everyone else, but there's a bit of a wrinkle here because as opposed to playing bishop a4, which is definitely the typical move, and he played this in the majority of the games, he also had a pretty sizable chunk of games with bishop takes c6, the so-called exchange variation. And this is not seen as a very high-level move, especially not nowadays, but he made it work. And in fact, after pawn takes, castles, in this position, Bobby Fischer had many games, and he had a very successful run. He often tried to simply establish a very strong center, c3, d4, and go from there. So the exchange variation, not extremely typical, but I will note a couple stats here. 11 games in the exchange variation, 8 wins and 3 draws. So a very successful career with taking on c6 here. But this is his opening repertoire against e5. Now against c5, he played, of course, the open Sicilian, and after takes, knight comes to f6, knight comes to c3. One of the, again, wrinkles that I would say that differs from the mainline theory is that he used to play his bishop to c4 almost regardless of what black plays. So against a6, he has several games in the Najdorf with bishop c4. Against e6, he has many games where he played bishop c4. Against knight c6 as well, he played bishop c4. And again, this is sort of seen as a sideline, as secondary to the main lines, largely because the bishop seems misplaced given black's often reply, which is e6, where the bishop is sort of staring at dust. But again, Bobby Fischer made it work, and he had obviously very good statistics with bishop c4 lines as well. So another interesting wrinkle that I don't think today is looked upon very nicely. But again, he made it work, and there's nothing objectively wrong with bishop c4, but you just need to know how to play those positions, and it's a little bit atypical for the Sicilian. So this is against the Sicilian, the open Sicilians with bishop c4. Now, I will mention one final opening with the white side, which is against the French with e6, because here he also had sort of a wrinkle, and I think this is what you see from him. So he plays the main line, knight c3, bishop e4, e5, and then a3. This is all main line until this position, where as opposed to playing, okay, queen g4, knight f3, there's a couple other moves, he plays a4, which is definitely not so popular today, but I think it shows a pretty strong positional idea, which is to develop the bishop actively to the a3, f8 diagonal. And what you'll see, and I'll just show a couple more moves, because from this position here, after queen d2, c4, bishop e2, Bobby had 4 games in this position with the white side, and regardless of his opponent's next move, in 2 of those games it was f6, in 1 game it was castles long, in 1 game it was b5, it doesn't matter, he played bishop a3 next. And again, you kind of see his intention very clearly is to establish dominance over the dark squares, especially because his opponent is missing very deeply that dark square bishop. So again, not so common, not so typical, but I think you see some commonality between all of the lines I just showed. He plays the Ruy Lopez, the open Sicilian, he plays the mainline French, but in all of those, he kind of has a wrinkle that he adds to it. And I think that is sort of a very interesting characteristic. Of course, back then he didn't know what was mainline, and maybe he expected his ideas to become mainline. But today, with the benefit of hindsight, we know that that has not happened. And it kind of adds a bit more character to his opening repertoire with the white side. So with that being said, we're going to switch colors here and jump to his replies as black. So against the move d4, he played the King's Indian defense pretty religiously, and after the move e4 here, another wrinkle that you kind of see. So d6 is the main move, and indeed he played this most often. He had dozens upon dozens of games with the move d6, but he also had I think close to a dozen games with castles here. And this is also super interesting, again, not seen as the best or most testing option, but what is very interesting about this is that after the move e5, which clearly castles provokes, Bobby simply went knight to e8. And after the move f4, he played d6. He had, I think, a couple of games in this very position, and you see something really amazing here. He provokes this big pawn expansion with e5 and then f4, but he recognizes, and the engines today definitely confirm his hypothesis, that these pawns are overextended and are more weaknesses than targets. They are more weaknesses than strengths, rather. They are targets for black to attack. And in both of those games that reached this position, by the way, he won. So another sort of wrinkle castling here. The engines after castle do not suggest, in fact, white to go on to this e5 and f4 mission, and they instead recommend a more conservative playing style. So castles here, another interesting detail that separates him, I think, from some of the mainline options. Okay, and finally, we have e4, and after the move c5, knight f3, we have the Sicilian. This is what he played with the black side against e4, and he played specifically the Najdorf Sicilian with a6 here. And I will show one kind of continuation. After bishop g5, he played the very common and popular queen b6, the so-called poison pawn. Why? Because he goes and takes the pawn on b2. No fear whatsoever. And again, we have the benefit of computers to tell us that this is totally fine for black, but he didn't. And yet he went for this in more than a couple games, I think close to a dozen. And after, in fact, rook b1, queen a3, he had fantastic results here, right? You can see that as black, you have less space, you have less activity, but okay, a pawn's a pawn, and you have an extra one of those. And indeed, his results again reflect this mindset. He had 7 games in this very position, and 4 of them he won with the black side, and he had 3 draws as well. So fantastic results across the board. And I think maybe aside from this Sicilian line, one commonality that I will end the video by highlighting, and I think you've maybe already caught on to this, is that he played the main lines, okay, the Ruy Lopez, the open Sicilians, the main line in the French, the King's Indian, but he played some sidelines within those main lines. And again, he didn't know that they were sidelines at the time, but today we do, and it shows, again, what I would call his opening character. It shows very concrete ideas. So in this Ruy Lopez, trading the bishops early on, not fearing the double bishops from the opponent, but going for this quick center expansion. When you compare that to the Sicilian, where he quickly placed his bishop on c4, not very typical, but well, he liked the targets on e6 and f7, these light squares that he could later attack, perhaps with f4 and f5, for example. So yeah, very interesting playing style from him. I hope you enjoyed these videos, and let me know again who you'd like to see next on this series, and also let me know if you're going to take any of these recommendations from Fischer and apply them to your own chess. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe if you're new around here, like this video if you learned something new from it, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.